Hammer's films, to most of the examiners in the British Board of Film Censors in the 1950s, were slightly below even no culture. The tension existed right from the start. You're talking about two sets of people who didn't understand each other's points of view in any way whatsoever. John Nichols was the secretary of the board when Dracula was submitted to the BBFC. His predecessor until 1956 was Arthur Watkins. Watkins was quite a liberal-minded guy. He was the one who instigated the idea that if film producers gave the BBFC the script of the film first to look at, it might save potential problems later.
You will help me, won't you? Say you will. Please.
How can I help you?
Get me away from here.
But why?
Because the X was really designed to deal with sex scenes, the censor was more focused on the sexual element than the horror element. So in Dracula in particular, they were concerned about diaphanous nightgowns and partial nudity, much more than they were concerned about the bloodletting. They were, of course, concerned about that. They didn't want too much blood, especially not in colour, spread around the screen, and they were bothered about specific scenes. They took an inference from the script that the vampire woman, when she was staked by Van Helsing in the crypt, was partially naked, and they said that was a no-no. There was a scene in the script where just before the climax, when Dracula decides to take Mina back to his castle, he needs Jimmy Sangster, the screenwriter, decided that he needed some transportation to do that, so he had Dracula waylay a passing coach, and by laying Mina in the road in front of the coach, and when the coach driver got off to see what was going on, Dracula came up behind him and cut his throat. The censors objected to that. That was taken out at script stage.
The uncouth, uneducated, disgusting and vulgar style of Mr. Jimmy Sangster cannot quite obscure the remnants of a good horror story, though they do give one the gravest misgivings about treatment. It seems to me there is nothing censorable in the story as a whole, but a good deal to complain of in details. Lucy's night dress must not be transparent, or unduly low cut. There must be no shot of the driver's cut throat.
Curiously, the one part of the script that the censors were not worried about is the very scene that has been reinstated in the print of Dracula now, which is the disintegration. They thought there was no cause for concern with the disintegration scene. They were much more worried about the nudity and the bloodletting, but in that order.
Believe me, there is no other way.
The first reels that were submitted were in black and white, and they knew it was going to be a Technicolor production, so they always wanted to see the thing in colour before it was passed. But even at the black and white stage, they objected to the staking of Lucy by Van Helsing. They objected to the scene in which Dracula approaches Mina in her bedroom, and they objected to the disintegration. They hadn't objected to the disintegration at script stage, but once they saw it, even in black and white, they thought it was too extreme. Also, they took exception to the vampire woman in Dracula's castle sinking her fangs into the neck of Jonathan Harker. So that scene, as it happened, was shortened. The scene remains in the film, but the payoff was taken out of it. If you take these scenes separately, in the case of the bedroom scene with Mina, the censors objected to the fact that the participants gave a sexual aura to the scene, particularly Mina, who seemed to take some sexual pleasure out of the fact that she was about to be metaphorically raped by Dracula. The censors objected bitterly to that. Hines protested and asked that the scene be kept in. That wasn't going anywhere. What they eventually agreed to instead was that they would lessen the erotic element, and to do that they simply changed the angle. The scene had been taken from a couple of angles, as most master sequences like that are. They had an alternative angle on it, which looked towards Dracula as opposed to looking towards Mina, and that lessened the impact, that lessened the sexual overtones. There was a lot of coming and going and arguing the toss over what should and shouldn't be in, and in the process of that, people do give ground. The censors gave ground, Hines gave ground. Eventually a compromise is reached.
With regard to the board's objections to Reel 9, I appreciate that the shot of the disintegrating hand looks different in colour from the way it did in black and white. However, I'm appealing against this cut not on the grounds of logic, but on those of cost. As you know, the music has to be scored to fit exactly a sequence of this sort, and the cost of rescoring, re-engaging an orchestra, and scoring theatre, and redubbing the reel, if we're forced to do this, will be fantastic. Yours sincerely, Anthony Hines, producer.
They relented on the crumbling hand, which stayed on the film. They wouldn't relent on the face clawing sequence. They insisted that that went. They insisted that the ankle, the bone sticking out of the boot, they insisted that that shot should be reduced, which it was.
We are prepared to accept the disintegrating hand, but not both shots of the disintegrating face. As agreed between us, the first shot of the face with the hand pulling down will therefore be cut. Yours sincerely, John Nichols, Secretary.
So that's how Dracula went out. That's how Dracula got its X certificate, not because of any consensus that was reached over what was morally acceptable on screen at the time, but because of plea bargaining on behalf of Tony Hines with the BBFC. Some months after Dracula went into release, one of the examiners at the board was sitting in her local hairdresser's one afternoon and read an article about, quote, one James Bernard, composer of film music, unquote, which stated that Bernard had been asked to write sex music for the film.
He is reported as saying that he was specially asked to write sex music for Dracula. So whenever a victim was being prepared, he produced something luscious on the violin and celeste.
This ran completely counter to the sentiments which had been expressed to the BBFC by James Carreras, chairman of Hammer, and Anthony Hines, producer of the film, that there was no intention to have any sexual element in Dracula. And the examiner in question passed a note to the secretary of the board, John Trevelyan, that was the case, and that was put on file. So future Hammer films would be impacted more than they had been in the past because of that. The censor was now aware that Hammer was intent on taking them for a ride.